Greetings to all of you. On this week 4 of the course, we continue our discussion on Agamemnon. Last time, we mainly concentrated on the sacrifice of Iphigenia and the context of the sacrifice, and how the sacrifice of Iphigenia is another story of a parent who sacrifices his own child because of a divine communication. This week, we'll concentrate on something else, especially on the topic or the stories that we find in the Agamemnon, in the chronology, because the tragedy begins indeed with the remembrance of the sacrifice of Iphigenia, but the main story of the text is about Agamemnon's return back and the way in which his wife Clytemnestra receives him. One topic I would like to talk about is justice. And Agamemnon often talks about justice when he comes back in the first speech. But the main problem with this that I like to discuss with you today is how the Greeks understand justice. And as you are probably familiar with this idea, for the Greeks, justice meant helping friends, benefiting friends, and harming enemies. This is a formula consecrated in the recent scholarship on Greek tragedy. But remember this once again. So justice is benefiting friends and harming enemies. And this is why, for Agamemnon, what he did in Troy was to act in view of justice. He was harmed by the fact that Paris stole his sister-in-law, right? Menelaus' wife, Helen, and he had to get revenge on the Trojans. Let me make sure that you understand that when I'm saying that, I'm not justifying his acts. I'm just explaining the way in which he was seeing things. Now, justice could be perceived in different ways as well, because if you take Clytemnestra's view, something bad happened to her. Someone who was supposed to be her friend, her husband, Agamemnon, murdered or took the life of someone who was very dear to her, and that is Iphigenia. If Clytemnestra acts according to justice, she gets into a dilemma. Who is now her friend? Is it her daughter, Iphigenia, or is it her husband, Agamemnon? If she takes Agamemnon's side, then she needs to continue in, or she needs to approve or to go along with the actions he did, including the sacrifice of their daughters. But if she takes Iphigenia's side, then she'll need to take revenge on her husband. And that's actually what happens in the play. And towards the end of the play, when she kills both Agamemnon and Cassandra, Clytemnestra suggests that that killing was because of what Agamemnon did to their daughter Iphigenia. Well, there are various perspectives, and there are various perspective in the sense in which there are various ways to analyze the story. And if we continue to talk about justice, what seems always clear is that justice, in the way in which the Greek understood it, helping friends, harming enemies, always brings suffering. The moment in which I harm somebody else, at that moment I become that person's enemy. And from that person's perspective, if he or she is supposed to act according to justice, then it is right for them to inflict suffering upon me. Suffering upon me can be done in different ways, not only by harming me physically or psychologically, but also by harming the people who are dear to me. So, if Agamemnon sacrificed Iphigenia, and by doing so, he harmed, his own wife, Clytemnestra now, according to justice, is justified in sacrificing or in bringing harm to Agamemnon. But she has even more reasons to do so, because Agamemnon doesn't come back from the battle alone, but he comes with Cassandra. This is almost an act of going out of marriage, or going out of friendship. And doing so, he places himself in a position to Clytemnestra. Now, Clytemnestra herself has other reasons too. So I'm mentioning all this to realize that the whole play is not necessarily only about justice, but also about the fact that Clytemnestra is together with Agamemnon's cousin and Aeschylus. I almost forgot his name. So she has also another interest to sacrifice her husband. But one point that I like you to remember here is that this Greek idea of justice, helping friends and harming enemies, produces a circle of violence. Because as I mentioned before, if I harm somebody else, that person is going to be harmed, they will act according to justice, so he will harm somebody definitely with me, and I will be harmed, or my friends will be harmed, and they will continue to act according to justice and inflict pain and suffering upon others. And the cycle of violence will go on and on and on, feeding on itself and never being able to stop, unless something happens, unless there is a point in which I stop somehow violence. But by stopping violence, I have to come out of justice. So I have to come out of helping friends and harming enemies. Because I have to see my enemies as friends, or not necessarily seeing them as friends, but I have to act towards my enemies as I act towards my friends. You probably remember the idea of prophetic literature that I mentioned before. One possible way to interpret Aeschylus Agamemnon is to see that Aeschylus is trying to describe to us what happens if we engage in this cycle of violence, if we return evil with evil. And doing so, we continue to harm not only the ones around us, our enemies, but also ourselves and the one around us who are our friends. And the tragedy only shows that that's what happens. Now the question would be, what can be done to work against that? I mentioned in the syllabus that I would encourage you to read already Euripides' Iphigenia Taulis. And at the end of this play, Orestes is mentioned. Orestes is the other child of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra. Now, if your mother kills your father, what are you to do if you're Orestes? What are you to do if you are required to act according to justice? Think of this question. Think also about all the other possible points of this tragedy. And I look forward to your comments. I encourage you to speak especially about justice in your comments. But at the same time, if you have a specific point in this play that you'd like to discuss and I have not discussed in this video, please write in the comments and I will make sure I will respond to those comments, to all of you actually, to see those comments. But the main point would be, first of all, to clarify how justice works and how justice works in connection with pain, suffering, and obviously sacrifice. Thank you, and see you next week. Let me know if you have any questions.